Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea has now had more than 20,000 cases of the coronavirus since the start of the pandemic. In the latest outbreak, there's a high number of patients who are critically ill. The South Korean government announces its biggest ever budget proposal for next year at nearly $470 billion. It aims to prepare the local economy for the post-pandemic era. And data show South Korea's exports in the second quarter suffered their biggest drop in 56 years. But in August, the on-year decline was the smallest since the pandemic started. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. It was 7 months ago that South Korea reported its first case of COVID-19. Now it's had a total of 20,000, and there's a growing number of patients with the disease who are critically ill. Choi Jung-yoon has our top story.
South Korea has reached 20,000 cases of COVID-19. This comes after the nation reported 235 new infections on Tuesday, bringing the total to 20,182. The unwanted milestone comes 7 months after South Korea saw its first coronavirus patient back on January 20th. The number of new cases has been falling for 5 straight days now, after the number peaked at over 400 last Thursday. However, with the sudden rise in the number of critically ill patients, health authorities are facing another crisis. The country saw 104 patients in critical condition on Tuesday. This is more than an 11-fold jump from the 9 critical patients reported roughly 2 weeks ago. Health authorities are saying this is related to the recent increase in the number of patients in their 60s. As the outbreaks of major cluster infections from the Sarangjae Church and August 15th rally are made up of more elderly people, generally categorized as high-risk group. This has put hospital beds for critically ill patients at a premium, sparking fears the healthcare system might be edging toward breaking point. In fact, 5 local governments, including the cities of Gwangju and Daejeon, have reported that there are 0 hospital beds for serious patients that can be used right away. Health authorities pledged to create 40 more intensive care beds by mid-September and secure more beds by relocating patients once their conditions improve. Choi Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has released its proposed budget for next year. It's bigger than ever before, approaching $500 billion, with key projects to prepare the country's economy for the post-coronavirus era. Ji-young reports.
South Korea has proposed a record $468 billion budget for 2021. This was revealed Tuesday by the Ministry of Economy and Finance. The proposed bill is 8.5% higher than this year's budget, and it's aimed at overcoming the economic turmoil sparked by the COVID-19 outbreak.
In short, next year's budget bill can be described as a leading nation overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. For this, we'll actively support Korean New Deal projects and focus on ensuring a fast and swift economic recovery.
The centerpiece of the bill is nearly $18 billion set aside for Korea's digital and Green New Deal projects for the post-COVID-19 world, which is expected to create some 360,000 jobs. The government has 10 key projects planned as part of the New Deal. One of them is to build a so-called digital dam by collecting data for use by the public and private sectors. The government will inject nearly $2.4 billion into building the digital dam. Another big slice will be used to stimulate the economy, including maintaining and creating some 2 million jobs, boosting consumption, as well as expanding private and public investments and regional developments. The government will also spend some $1.5 billion to be a leading country in terms of virus prevention measures. The fund will be used to strengthen the prevention system, including building more hospitals for infectious diseases, developing COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, and training talent in the medical field. In addition, the government will provide roughly $38 million to schools so they can run online classes as concerns linger over COVID-19. The 2021 budget bill has been drafted to be expansionary. South Korea's budget deficit to GDP ratio is forecast to be at 5.4%, and the national debt to GDP ratio is expected to be around 47% next year. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The budget also includes 60 other ambitious projects aimed at using technology to improve people's quality of life. These range from new exciting uses for drones to mobile ID cards. Oh Jung-hee tells us more.
Bringing in smart, innovative technology to improve people's daily lives. That's the South Korean government's main focus in its increased budget for next year. For one, Seoul will invest $6 million to build an AI-based system that helps make clinical decisions by analyzing the biometric data of critical patients. And $1.3 million will be spent on drones to manage cultural assets in remote areas and immediately respond when disasters occur. But more noteworthy is the move to spend $10 million to make urban air mobility a reality. The money will be used to develop larger drones that can carry people across South Korea's cities. The government also plans to spend $166 million on yearly increase of over 4,800% to install AI-based closed-circuit televisions at ports, coastal areas, and army bases across the nation. This is to further strengthen surveillance as military reforms will gradually reduce the total number of troops. South Korea will also spend $26.5 million developing online services so people inside and outside the country can enjoy K-pop concerts and appreciate Korean cultural assets. Other than these, the 2021 budget will also be used to create mobile ID systems that people can use instead of having to show their ID cards. The government will also help Korean restaurants in the country and overseas make menus in different languages. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea in the second quarter saw its biggest economic contraction in 11 years, in large part because of the blow dealt to its exports. But exports did improve last month, especially compared to other countries. Kim Sung-min reports.
South Korea's economy in this year's second quarter contracted by the largest amount since the 2008 financial crisis. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that the country's real gross domestic product fell 3.2% on quarter from April to June. Though it is 0.1 percentage point higher than the central bank's previous estimate, it is still the lowest growth rate in around 11 years. On year, the economy shrank by 2.7%. Real gross national income also fell 2.2% on quarter. The economic contraction was mainly caused by the huge drop in exports. Exports plummeted 16.1% in the second quarter, the biggest fall in more than 56 years, with declining demand for automobiles and mobile phones. The Trade Ministry did have some positive news though. It announced on Tuesday that exports for August were a little better, totaling around $37 billion, with the daily average down 3.8% on year. That is the smallest drop since the start of the pandemic.
South Korea is recovering relatively well. According to recent data by the WTO, the drop rate of South Korea's exports was the fourth lowest out of the key 10 exporting countries.
Acknowledging the downturn, the Vice Finance Minister said in an economic meeting on Tuesday that the contraction of the real economy is unavoidable due to the increased number of infections and strengthened precautionary measures. He also said the government is providing around $150 billion of financial support through this year's budget. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, U.S. stocks, of course, have seen this amazing V-shaped recovery since the March low. They were mixed on Monday, but we see the S&P and the Dow posting their best August since the 1980s. Tell us about the global markets today.
Yes, if you look at the Dow Jones, it did decline yesterday by about 0.8%, and also S&P 500 shedded about 0.2%. In the contrast, NASDAQ added about 0.7% to reach 11,776. But overall, if you look at the month performance, as you said, Dow Jones jumped 7.6%, S&P 500 jumped 7%, NASDAQ jumped 9.6%, and these are record high number of rise in a 1 month period. If you look at the overall Wall Street, it seems to show some signaling that is mixed signals are shown because that these indices have risen quite significantly. And we're looking at some of the macro numbers and how the economic recovery is planning out. The Fed Reserve Vice Chairman Richard Clarida said that rates will not go up just because the jobless rate swings down. Currently, the jobless rate, unemployment ratio is at 10.2%. We doubt that the Fed will change their rates until the unemployment ratio goes down to below 5%. If that's the case, we think that the overall environment is going to continue to be positive for the equity market. Treasury yield seems to be fairly stable at around 0.7% for the 10 years government bond. And if it remains to be that kind of level, and also the currency level remains to be at where it is, around 92, 93 territories, overall liquidity will be ample enough and the overall financial conditions will be positive enough that the equity will continue to show a rising trend for U.S. market in the future.
And here in Korea, the Kospi and the Kosdaq both higher today thanks to buying by individual investors. What's happening in the Korean markets and your outlook for the days ahead?
Yes, if you look at yesterday's performance, it was quite weak after it started with the very strong numbers for Kospi, but it ended almost 1% down yesterday. Most of the people were worried about the pandemic issues, but luckily we see the market recovering back again today as Kospi has risen by about 1% and Kosdaq is up by about 0.6%. The reason for this kind of rise is because of the manufacturing numbers are coming in better than expected. First of all, from the China side, the Caixin China manufacturing PMI came in at 53.1 in August, rising from 52.8, beating the market consensus of 52.6. So clearly, the numbers are better than expected. And it is the highest number expended most since 2011. So clearly this is a positive number. And also South Korea's manufacturing numbers affected positively as well. If you look at the market South Korea manufacturing PMI, it increased to 48.5 in August from 46.9 in the previous month. So clearly we are seeing improvement in the business cycle-wise. Clearly on the export side, these are things are looking better, while there's concern about the domestic demand because of the COVID-19 incident. All in all, we are seeing a, comparison between export versus domestic demand, where the export looking better than expected, while the domestic consumption looking worse than expected in the future. So we will see this kind of trend to continue in the future. But nevertheless, we think that the overall liquidity condition is ample enough that customer deposits rising in a rise speed, affecting cost speed to further go up in the future.
Well, you just mentioned your view about the Korean economy to some degree there, but the economy posting its worst performance in the second quarter since the financial crisis. What does that say to you?
Yes, if you look at the GDP numbers, it contracted 3.2% during the second quarter from the first quarter. It is worse than expected. But if you look at the estimation, it was 3.3% contraction, so it's slightly better, but not by much. All in all, the central bank is revising down these GDP numbers as it goes along because of the worse than expected domestic consumption numbers. If you look at the second quarter, the domestic consumption was quite poor, and third quarter we were hoping that the numbers will recover. But still, there's a concern about the COVID-19, where it might move to 2.5 possibilities. And if that continues, then the second stage social distancing is quite a bit of a damper for the domestic consumption recoveries. But however, though, despite the concern about domestic consumption, as far as the export numbers are concerned, it is coming in at better than expected. And it is going down by about 9.9% year on year. But nevertheless, the number is improving. And monthly export dropping is going to be much less as we go into the future. Furthermore, if you look at the Japanese yen versus Korean won, Japanese yen depreciation has stopped while the Korean won seems to be remaining weak. If that's the case, then comparatively, Korea's export numbers will be better than Japan, we think. If that's the case, then we think that export-related stocks will do better with the continuation of weak currency at the current point in time. So I think the question mark is domestic consumption versus export, and we prefer export at this point in time.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insights today. Always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
This summer, of course, the coronavirus pandemic has all but canceled vacation for many families. Looking for other options, some have taken up camping, but with a twist. They're pitching their tents at home in their apartments in the city. Our Min Soo-kyun reports.
From the outside, this home seems no different from any other, but once you walk in, it feels like a camping site. One father of two, who has been into camping for 11 years, has filled his room with camping gear just as he would at any campsite. His extensive collection of lanterns and camping cookware are placed on one side of the room, while the other side hosts a table with a built-in gas stove. Following a recent spike in COVID-19 cases and a 2-month-long monsoon season in the country, at-home camping has become a new trend. And with tougher social distancing measures now in place, the decision was made to move the campsite indoors.
There's a campsite just 5 minutes away from here, and I used to go there about 2 times a month. But it has been closed since March, and I can't camp there anymore. That's why I decided to start home camping instead.
But they're not alone in this sweeping trend. Instead of overseas vacations, families are choosing to give their children a safe camping experience with the comforts of home. With folding chairs, a parasol, and lights, one family took the initiative to bring the outdoors in. They planned a trip early this year, but were forced to call it off due to the coronavirus outbreak. Since then, camping at home has become their weekend getaway, but it hasn't been easy.
It's really hard to get equipment you want. Prices have almost doubled and demand is high even for used camping gear. It really feels that camping is popular these days.
South Korea's retailer G-Market says sales of camping tents in the first 6 months of 2020 surged 57% on year, while tables and chairs rose by 44% and 23% respectively. Other e-commerce retailers are also seeing sales of camping gear jump as many more people are splurging on camping accessories to lift their spirits in the midst of a global pandemic. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.